Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished and respected coach from Zurich, Switzerland, Liz Naik. Liz, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very nice to be here. Thank you.
Liz is a well-being coach. So, Liz, let's get straight into the work that you are doing. Tell me a little bit about your own journey into becoming a well-being coach and what inspired you to take this path.
Well, it's a very good question. Originally, I was a biochemist and worked in biochemistry and biotechnology in the UK for almost 20 years. I was a senior manager in manufacturing and specialized in that. And then my husband's work moved to Switzerland.
Okay.
And I couldn't get a work permit immediately. Then we started a family. And then when you have children, it's a completely different environment to a business one, being with young families. And it became very clear how challenging it was to be a parent in today's world, where you don't have control over many things influencing children's growth and development. Where we live in Switzerland, it's a corridor for drug trafficking. And children, there's a lot of gangs. Even though we live in very quiet towns, there's a lot of gangs. And knives, not so much, but drugs, definitely. And it's very easy to get in the wrong path. And once what became, we also have personal involvement then with psychiatrists and psychologists. And it was probably 2017, the worst year of my life. And I found there had to be something better to help support children and parents. And even what if they could become more resilient and say no to things and have better self-esteem. So I set off on a journey of discovery for myself too, and learning, and started off on a platform called Mind Valley and found one thing that helped with resilience was what I was trying to build, and limiting beliefs was hypnotherapy. So I started there, and that was great, but coaching was something that was really missing. It was okay having a being therapy side, but the coaching was really important in preparation for therapy, but also for building goals and achieving them. So then I did coaching, and then it was really in digital wellbeing as well, an ICF coaching course, and I found really there was something missing from all of that, and that was the environment, how the environment affects us, and how we can build our resilience depending on environments we're in. So I went to stress management, and in that journey, I found NLP was really so important to basic understanding of how our mind works, and also psychosensory techniques. And I discovered the trauma word and how important that was in the basis for so many things. And then well-being seemed to be the best way forward to help people build resilience. And so that's where I am today.
Wow. And how do you define well-being in the context of coaching?
In my coaching, well, I would say there are many important parts of well-being. And my area is more the mind, body, and environment, connecting those three together. Well-being is important to have sleep and good nutrition and exercise, but they're not my expertise. I touch on those. But my well-being is looking at the balance between the environment, our body, and mind altogether.
Well said. And you also mentioned stress and trauma. What are some common misconceptions that you face when you talk to people about stress and trauma?
Well, that's also really important because stress is everywhere, and it has most of the time been involved in working with stress management. People think it's a negative thing. In Switzerland, people don't like the idea of being stressed. They like to love work. They really love work and don't want to even admit to having stress, as it's thinking it's negative. But stress is essential to life, and it's positive as well as negative. And it's our way of staying alive, our survival response. But it's also very important to how we are motivated. So you can have eustress, as it's called, positive stress as well. And more recently in business world, people realize that you need eustress to be motivated and more productive and engaged in your goals at work. But what also seems to be missing there is the fact that all stress is accumulative. So you have a life outside of work, stress outside of work, and it all goes together in a bucket, and it gets to a point where you don't function properly anymore. And if you're landing heavily eustress on people, you need to have a good way of supporting well-being in a company too. So there's a misunderstanding there that some people believe you can counteract negative stress, eustress, but it's actually accumulative. In terms of trauma, it's an overused word. Having a flood with 2 inches of water in your garden can be traumatic to some people, but it's really not. And the other main thing about trauma is that the common perception is that once you are traumatized, it's there for life. In fact, it's not. There are ways you can resolve trauma and get back to a good state of well-being.
Well said. And when I was reading about you and preparing for my conversation, I was also fascinated to see and read this phrase, first aid for stress and trauma, where the acronym is FAST. My one question is, what is the first aid for stress and trauma technique? And how can it help people in vulnerable communities?
Well, FAST, First Aid for Stress and Trauma, is actually a collection of techniques. It has 2 main hero techniques, which would be havening, self-havening. I can explain a bit about that in a minute, but also tapping, but a very specialized form of tapping that doesn't have any words in. So it's called trauma tapping technique and also havening. Both of these techniques, plus a toolbox of fast tools, help people in situations where there aren't any therapists, or you could be in, by vulnerable situation, I mean where you are very stressed, perhaps you're vigilant the whole time. It could be in a village in Uganda or in Rwanda, or it could be in a prison in United States, or it could be in a school, in a city school in the UK. So you're vulnerable to trauma, you're vulnerable to making bad decisions, and your continuous stress in your body is also obviously not healthy for you too. But it's really when people are in situations where they're vulnerable in somewhere like Rwanda, they have a history of trauma in the country, but also they have a lot of people that don't have the opportunity to learn, or when they do have the opportunity, they don't learn well. So these techniques can help people reduce suffering. And when you reduce suffering of someone like child soldiers, it also reduces the violence in the community. So this is the aim of it. And the 2 techniques are tapping where you're tapping on different points of meridian points or acupuncture points. And havening is something where you use your touch, sensory touch, to generate delta brainwaves. And these in turn generate oxytocin, serotonin, GABA, and reduce cortisol. And so you can help calm someone to a state of safety, even if it's intermittent, and give the body a break. But also in schools, children learn better, they pass their exams, and in some prisons, violence is reduced by 70%. So it's really very, and the tools are designed not to be traumatizing or re-traumatizing. This is really very important.
Well said. And, your example of Rwanda gives me, the lead for my next question. How important is a person's environment in their overall well-being and stress management?
Well, often people think of well-being as a relationship between the mind and body, and perhaps the highest spirit to mind, body, and spirit. But our nervous system is continuously monitoring the environment. And so we're getting input from outside, also from our own minds, which comes from the trauma side in somewhere like Rwanda. But if you're in an environment where there is violence and fear and hunger, but mainly in the Democratic Republic of Congo, just over the border, is a war again. And so there's this feeling of not being safe. Your body is continuously on guard. And you can even think of simple examples in all the world where if you want to work well, you need to have a tidy desk. It's a very simple example, but your environment really does influence how you feel. For the nervous system, it's important how you can then react to everything, your whole state. So it's a relationship again between what's coming in from outside, how you're thinking and how you're feeling. It gives you a state. And when you're in some place like Rwanda or an inner city school, your overall landscape, your overall being is individual to you, but you can be very vulnerable. And these tools help, the first aid tools help to calm people and to give them strength, and it builds a community together, basically.
Great response. The other aspect, Liz, I wanted to get your perspective is the impact of the entire digital environment on each one of us. I mean, we are just completely submerged with so many different types of digital beams, if I can use that term.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how digital well-being impacts mental and physical health.
Well, I think the most obvious thing that comes to mind physically, of course, nutrition affects how people are physically too, and obesity increases so much because we don't move enough. And it's more in terms of physical health, what we don't do because we're using digital equipment. So we're not moving anymore. Children aren't moving when they're learning. And people eat at the computer, work at the computer, and obesity is one thing that physically increases. Eyesight is something that is dramatically affected. It becomes short-sighted. It's like most of South Korea has a short-sight problem. You can do exercise to counteract that, but most people don't. And the mental side is complex, and it's most people just aren't aware of how anxiety can creep up on you without knowing. It has a different way of affecting you than anxiety from fear. It creeps up. And how, for example, multitasking. When someone's sitting at a computer, they have tabs open. There's super links, hyperlinks to other things. And your brain is always choosing whether to open that hyperlink or not. You don't be aware of that. And so you're making a choice every time just by looking at your screen when you have lots of things open. So multitasking is something we can't actually do, although we think we can. And every time you make a decision about what to do or not do, your brain, you're losing energy and you're gaining clutter into your brain. So a lot of the focus is lost. We're unable to concentrate. We wear out of energy. And interruptions is a thing that we're continuously interrupted at work. And every time you have an interruption, you have stress from that, but you work harder to keep the same productivity, but you end up more tired. And so at work, it's interrupted. Then even if you don't have an interruption, you've learned to interrupt yourself. So you can't win, and you really need to have built-in breaks away from technology. But often your employers don't allow that. So you end up with burnout. And that's a big problem, obviously, more and more. And it's not something, I guess in Switzerland, if you have a trauma from an accident, you've got so many things to help you. But if you have some kind of breakdown mentally, there's no system in place at the moment to help counteract that in a workplace. Amazing. So a lot of that is from digital technology.
Thank you. And what psychosensory techniques have you found most impactful to alleviate anxiety, stress, burnout, and so many related challenges we face?
It's going back to these two techniques that are adapted to the first aid tools. We use those in therapy too. I don't use tapping in therapy, but I use it because I'm not trained in thought field therapy or emotional freedom techniques, but I am trained and qualified to train other people in trauma tapping technique. That can reduce your level of anxiety within a few minutes. So it's very powerful and very effective. And in the background of that, it's reducing your trauma as well. So what I am qualified in to use as a practitioner in the therapy field is havening. And that means to bring you to a safe haven. And this is the one where you use sensory touch. There's some different types of sensors for pain, which is very fast, but sensory touch is very gentle and slow and calming. And delta brainwaves are what we use when we're in a deep sleep or going towards meditation, is theta and delta waves. And so you can bring that calm into you. And with therapy, you have to open the problem, the stress that's cause of anxiety, but only briefly, and you don't have to talk about it. This is what's so important. You don't have to re-traumatize someone by looking at the problem. And when once you open that technique, you open that neuron pathway, then you have to distract the person away from that and fill their working memory with distractions, which could be humming, dancing, if it's appropriate. It's great in groups to do that. It's really fun. You can use balloons with children, or you can, if you're doing an individual person, you can also use spelling, number games. And at the very start of any therapy or practitioner session, we find a safe state, and this is where we use NLP coming into, is you find a safe state where someone feels safe before you move on to anything else. And you can use lots of different techniques within havening to remove the traumatic, the emotion connected to trauma. You physically, chemically, I suppose, whatever way it is, take it, the dissociation from the neuron pathway, in the amygdala, you dissociate that emotion connected to the trauma, and then you can think back to that trauma without the traumatic response, so it's not present anymore. And part of the coaching comes into this after, where you've removed something, you bring back something positive to the body, and then go on to goals and future.
Very interesting. So, I have time for two or three more questions.
Okay.
The next question, Liz, is what is the most challenging aspect of guiding someone through either a trauma recovery or any other recovery?
Well, I'd say, first of all, starting it is probably the most challenging thing, is for someone to want to start that. And once you get going, it's, some people are motivated by the trauma, and it's a driving force that's changed their life, and they're trying to, I mean, I can think of somebody who involved in knife crime, whose brother was killed in knife crime. He's motivated and driven to help other people prevent that. So he would be reluctant to leave that trauma go, because there's also people who believe that trauma is what event they may have experienced. They have a survivor's guilt, letting it go. They deserve to have that because they lived and someone didn't. So I would say those things are important. Otherwise, once somebody begins to let go of their trauma, it changes their life, and they're normally just want to go ahead with it. But those other blocks is letting go of it. They're so used to it, it can be hard going. It has to be something the person themselves really wants to do.
And on that note, Liz, I just want to say thank you so much for talking to me, for sharing your own journey. What an amazing journey you've had. I mean, we spoke about the definition of well-being. We spoke about some misconceptions. You told me about two techniques you use for first aid for stress and trauma, or FAST. We spoke about digital well-being. You also explained to us a little bit about psychosensory techniques. We spoke about what are some of the challenges when you guide so many of your clients. And finally, you gave us an amazing story, of a success story of someone you helped, who I'm sure is eternally grateful for the inputs you gave to her. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Thank you too.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.